For nearly 3 centuries, a seafaring people from the cold north terrified and reshaped the whole of Europe. We call them the Vikings, and their age lasted roughly 300 years. It is often said their story began with fire and slaughter at a single lonely monastery. But the truth is stranger, because it really began with silver flowing in from the Islamic world. They were farmers and traders long before they became raiders of distant Christian shores. In their longships, they crossed open oceans that no other Europeans dared to sail. They founded cities, unified whole kingdoms, and settled lands nobody in Europe had ever seen. They reached Iceland, then Greenland, and at last the wooded coast of North America itself. Their kings would one day rule England, Denmark, and Norway all at the same time. One of their leaders even stood beside the Holy Roman Emperor in the heart of Rome. And when it ended on a narrow bridge in England, it had already changed the words you speak today. This is the entire history of the Vikings, 3 centuries of the world in 20 minutes. Long before the raids, Scandinavia was a land of scattered farms, dark forests, and cold fjords. Its people fished, farmed thin soil, and traded furs, amber and iron across the Baltic Sea. In the 8th century, something remarkable began to flow into their timber halls. Islamic silver. Merchants carried coins, minted thousands of miles away, in the great caliphate of the East. Scandinavian traders followed the rivers of the eastern lands, pushing towards Baghdad and the Caspian. They swapped furs, amber, and captives for this seemingly endless stream of eastern silver. Modern study of Viking rings and ingots shows this silver arrived before the Western raids ever began. In other words, the Viking Age was born not in blood, but in trade. That wealth built ambition, faster ships, and a hunger to see what lay beyond the horizon. It also revealed the sea roads and rivers that would soon carry warriors, not just goods. The same restless energy that opened trade routes would soon open Europe's monasteries with an axe. For now the north was rising quietly, growing rich on the silver of distant kings. The storm was coming, and almost no one in Christian Europe saw it approaching. In the year 793, the storm finally broke on the coast of England. Off the coast of Northumbria lay the holy island of Lindisfarne, home to peaceful monks. It was undefended, wealthy, and utterly unprepared for what came out of the sea. Norse raiders stormed ashore, cutting down monks and seizing everything of value they could carry. They smashed altars, stole golden crosses, and dragged captives back towards their waiting ships. To Christian Europe, this was not just a robbery. It was an unthinkable act of terror. The heathens had struck the very heart of God's own house on English soil. News of the raid spread across the kingdoms, filling monks and kings with dread. The scholar Alcuin wrote in horror that never before had such terror appeared in Britain. This single raid is remembered as the traditional beginning of the entire Viking Age. The longships slipped away over the horizon, low in the water and heavy with plunder. But Lindisfarne was only the first, and the raiders would return again and again. What made the Vikings so unstoppable was not just their courage, but their extraordinary ships. The longship was a masterpiece, light, fast, and built from overlapping planks of oak. Its shallow draft let it cross open oceans, yet still glide up the shallowest river. With a single square sail, it could catch the wind or be rowed by strong arms. This meant no coast, no estuary, and no riverside monastery was ever truly safe. The men aboard were farmers, fishermen, and traders who took up arms in the summer. They fought with spears, broad axes, and round wooden shields painted in bold colors. Only the wealthiest carried a sword and an iron helmet, for these were costly treasures. And no, despite the legends, their helmets never had horns upon them. They believed a brave death in battle earned a place in the golden hall of Valhalla. Their gods were Odin the Wise, Thor the Thunderer, and cunning, dangerous Loki. With such ships and such beliefs, the Vikings were ready to raid an entire continent. By the year 845, the raiders had grown bolder and far more organized. A fleet of 120 ships rowed up the River Seine towards Paris. They were led by a warlord the sources name as Reginhari, a fearsome commander. Paris in this age was a smaller town clustered on an island in the river. The Vikings swept aside every defense and threatened to burn the city to the ground. The West Frankish king, Charles the Bald, faced a terrible choice. Rather than fight, he chose to pay the raiders an enormous ransom to leave. He handed over 7,000 pounds of silver, an almost unimaginable fortune. This was the first recorded Danegeld, a payment made simply to make the Vikings go away. It was a fateful lesson, for the Vikings learned that fear alone could buy them silver. But triumph turned sour, as a brutal plague of dysentery swept through Reginheri's men. Reginheri himself is said to have died of the disease soon after his great victory, and that quiet, unglamorous death would grow into one of history's greatest legends. From tales like Reginheri's grew the legend of Ragnar Lothbrok, the greatest Viking hero. The sagas say he raided far and wide, feared by every king in the West. Legend claims he was captured and thrown into a pit writhing with venomous snakes. They say he died there laughing, boasting that his sons would avenge him. But the real story is far less glamorous and far more human. His likeliest model was the warlord Reginheri, killed not by snakes, but by disease. There is another twist, for Lothbrok may not have been a man at all. Some evidence points to a 9th century noblewoman named Lothbroka. She may have been the true mother of famous leaders like Ivar and Bjorn Ironside. Over the centuries, her identity was forgotten and merged with a male hero's name. So the mighty Ragnar Lothbrok may be a legend stitched together from many real people. Yet legend or not, the sons of Ragnar were about to make history all too real. In the year 865, the Vikings changed their game entirely. No longer content with summer raids, they came to conquer and to stay. A coalition of warriors landed in East Anglia, calling themselves the Great Heathen Army. They were led by fierce commanders like Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan and Ubba. Their goal was nothing less than to topple the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of England. The name struck terror, conjuring images of an endless, unstoppable horde. But here lies one of the great surprises of the entire Viking Age. The Great Heathen Army was not a horde at all, but shockingly small. Historians studying the fleet's estimate only 500 to 1,000 men. Yet with discipline, mobility and terror, this tiny force conquered kingdom after kingdom. They struck fast, forced tribute, and moved on before any defense could gather. One by one, the ancient English kingdoms began to fall before them, and soon they turned their eyes north, towards a great and wealthy city. In the year 866, the army marched on the northern city of York. The English called it Earforwick, a rich trading port with old Roman walls. The Vikings stormed the city and seized it after fierce and bloody fighting. The Anglo-Saxon kings who tried to retake it were killed in the desperate struggle. The Vikings renamed the conquered city Jorvik and made it their own. Jorvik became a thriving Viking stronghold and capital in the north of England. Its streets filled with craftsmen working leather, bone, amber and precious metals. Traders arrived from across the known world, bringing silk, silver and exotic goods. This was no mere raiding camp, but a living, growing Viking city. For nearly a century, Norse kings would rule from Jorvik's timber halls. The Vikings were no longer just visitors to England. They were settlers and rulers. But in the south, one young king was preparing to fight back. In the kingdom of Wessex ruled a young king named Alfred, later called the Great. The Vikings drove him into the marshes, and his kingdom hung by a thread. From those wetlands, he gathered his scattered men and planned a bold return. In the year 878, he met the Vikings at Edington. Alfred's shield wall held firm and shattered the Viking army in a decisive battle. The defeated Viking leader Guthrum was forced to make peace with Wessex. Guthrum even agreed to be baptized as a Christian as part of the treaty. The treaties drew a line across England, dividing the land in two. The Vikings kept the north and east, a region that became known as the Danelaw. There, Norse law, language and customs took deep root in English soil. Alfred had not destroyed the Vikings, but he had stopped them conquering everything. Meanwhile, far to the north, another kingdom was being forged over a broken heart. In Norway there was no single king, only many small, quarreling petty kingdoms. The saga tells that one young king, Harold, fell in love with a woman named Gyda, but Gyda proudly refused his marriage proposal and mocked his small ambitions. She said she would not marry him until he ruled the whole of Norway. Stung by her words, Harold made a dramatic and famous vow. He swore not to cut or comb his hair until all Norway was his. For 10 long years he fought and conquered the petty kingdoms one by one. The struggle climaxed at the Great Sea Battle of Hafrsfjord around 872. Harold crushed his rivals and became the first sole king of a unified Norway. At last he cut his tangled hair and earned the name Harold Fairhair. Many chieftains who refused to bow fled westward across the open sea. They were searching for freedom, and for empty land no king yet ruled. Far out in the cold Atlantic lay an island no European had ever settled. Norse explorers first sighted Iceland in the 840s. It was a land of fire and ice, of volcanoes, glaciers, and steaming springs. The only inhabitants were a few Irish monks, who soon departed. Then, fleeing kings and seeking land, Norse settlers arrived in their longships. They brought cattle, sheep, seeds, and the timber they would need to build. They built turf-roofed longhouses and carved farms out of the harsh green valleys. By around 920, all the good land had been claimed. Remarkably, the settlers governed themselves without any king at all. Each summer they gathered at the Althing, one of the world's oldest parliaments. There they made laws and settled feuds beneath the open Icelandic sky. But some restless souls still dreamed of land even further to the west. One of those restless souls was a fiery man called Erik the Red. Erik was a troublemaker, banished from Iceland after a series of deadly feuds. With nowhere left to go, he sailed west into the unknown ocean. He found a vast frozen land of towering ice, fjords, and green summer meadows. Cleverly, he named it Greenland to tempt others to follow him there. Around the year 985, he led settlers to colonize it. The warm medieval climate made farming just possible along its sheltered coasts. They founded an eastern and a western settlement of turf farms and small churches. They hunted seals and walrus, trading precious ivory back to hungry Europe. These settlements clung on for centuries before the cold finally claimed them. But Erik's son Leif would sail even further than his daring father. He would set his eyes on a mysterious land seen far to the west. Around the year 1000, Leif Erikson sailed west from Greenland into the unknown. He was following rumors of a land of forests seen by an earlier storm-blown ship. After days at sea, his crew sighted a green and wooded coastline. They had reached North America 5 centuries before Columbus was even born. They found wild grapes, timber and rivers thick with salmon, and called it Vinland. They built a small settlement of turf and timber houses on the northern coast. Centuries later, archaeologists found their ruins at a place called Elance Orks Meadows. It proved beyond doubt that Vikings were the first Europeans in the Americas. But the Norse were few, and the local peoples they met were many. After tense encounters and open conflict, the settlers could not hold on. Within a few short years, they abandoned Vinland and sailed back to Greenland. The Vikings had touched the edge of the world, then quietly let it go. Back in England, the Vikings had discovered something more profitable than plunder. Why risk your life raiding when frightened kings would simply pay you to leave? They perfected the Danelaw, a vast protection racket against desperate monarchs. The threat was simple: pay us in silver or we burn your kingdom. Between 991 and 1014, they bled England dry. In those years alone, they squeezed out over £150,000 of silver. That was the equivalent of some 36 million silver coins. To raise it, English kings taxed their own weary and frightened people. As one historian put it, England paid for her conquest with her own money. The payments bought only brief peace, for the Vikings always came back for more. Each new demand left the English crown poorer, weaker, and more divided. Soon a Danish prince would decide that silver was no longer enough. That prince was Cnut, son of the Danish king, and he came to conquer. Between 1015 and 1016, he launched a massive invasion of England. The English rallied behind their brave king, Edmund Ironside. The two fought a savage war up and down the length of England. At the decisive Battle of Asandun, Cnut broke the English army. Edmund and Cnut agreed to divide the kingdom, but Edmund soon died. With his rival gone, Cnut was crowned sole king of all England. A Viking now sat upon the throne of the whole of England. But Cnut ruled not as a raider, but as a wise and Christian king. He kept English laws, protected the church, and married an English queen. The savage age of raiding had transformed into an age of kingship, and Cnut's ambitions stretched far beyond the shores of England alone. Cnut inherited Denmark, then seized Norway, joining them both to England. Together, these lands became the mighty North Sea Empire. For the first time, a single Viking king ruled across the northern seas. In the year 1027, Cnut travelled all the way to Rome. There he attended the coronation of the Holy Roman Emperor himself. The grandson of pagan raiders now stood among Europe's greatest Christian rulers. He used the visit to strike shrewd deals for his people. He won reduced tolls and safe passage for English and Danish pilgrims and merchants. The wild sea raiders had become respected players of European royal politics. There is a famous tale of Cnut and the incoming tide. He commanded the waves to halt, to prove no king can rule the sea. But when Cnut died, his great empire quickly fell apart. The final act came in the fateful year 1066. The Norwegian king Harald Hardrada invaded England to claim its throne. Hardrada was a giant of a man and the last great Viking warlord. The English king, Harold Godwinson, marched north with astonishing speed. He caught the Norwegians resting and unprepared at Stamford Bridge. In the chaos, one lone Viking held the narrow wooden bridge alone. Armed with a Great Dane axe, he cut down every man who came at him. He is said to have struck down more than 40 Englishmen, all by himself. At last, a soldier floated beneath the bridge in a small boat. He thrust a spear up through the planks and killed the mighty warrior. The English swarmed across and destroyed the Norwegian army, killing Hardrada. This battle is remembered as the end of the Viking Age in Britain. The Viking Age ended, but the Vikings never truly left us. Wherever they settled, they poured their language into the tongue of England. They did not just add a few strange words for raiding and ships. They reshaped the most common, everyday words the English spoke. Astonishingly, the words there and them all came from Old Norse. These essential pronouns replaced the older English words entirely. Even the word window comes from the Old Norse vindauga. It literally meant wind eye, an opening for the wind and the light. Words like sky, knife, egg and husband all carry their Norse roots. Hundreds of English place names still end in Norse words like by and thorpe. So every day, in ordinary speech, we still speak a little Old Norse. The raiders were gone, but their voices echoed on in our very language. So what, in the end, was the true legacy of the Vikings? They began not as monsters, but as farmers and traders chasing silver. For 3 centuries they raided, ruled and reshaped the face of Europe. They founded cities like Dublin, York, and countless towns across the north. They crossed oceans no one else dared, reaching Iceland, Greenland, and America. Their descendants became the Normans, who would one day conquer England themselves. Their blood, laws, and words are woven deep into the modern world. The Vikings were explorers, traders, settlers, and yes, fearsome warriors. They remind us that history is rarely as simple as the legends tell. The horned helmets and snake pits were mostly invented long after they were gone. The real Vikings were more remarkable than any myth we could imagine. And that is the entire history of the Vikings, the men who sailed into legend.